Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. I'm here in Franklin, Tennessee, where I spent the weekend at the Middle Tennessee Civil War Show. You students of the Civil War know Franklin as the site of an 1864 battle that ended badly for the Confederacy after a series of frontal assaults compared by some historians to Pickett's charge decimated the army commanded by General John Bell Hood. Civil War relic hunters know the Franklin Show as a place to network with dealers and collectors and to find all sorts of artifacts, original uniforms, firearms, swords, equipment, and every imaginable paper item, including my area of interest and fascination, Civil War photography, original images of soldiers and sailors. This is a big show in Franklin. There are other big shows too, including Mansfield, Ohio, and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where we collectors congregate to share the joy of the hobby. Each show is like going to a museum, but the difference is that every artifact you see is for sale. These shows have been around for decades, and they've helped support a generation of collectors. As this generation of collectors pass from the scene and new generations communicate and make transactions more and more in the digital world, the future of physical shows like Franklin, it's an open question. But for now, at least, such shows continue to bring in dealers and collectors to enjoy the hobby and each other's company. Military Images Magazine has been all around for the ride, setting up a table to document images for publication. Back in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, we used a 35 millimeter camera to shoot Civil War images at our table. Nowadays, like everybody else, we've gone digital. We use a scanner to do that. A conservative estimate, my estimate, is that myself and my predecessors have scanned upwards of 20,000 original photographs from the 19th century, the majority of them from the Civil War period. Now, back to this Franklin show. One of the collectors who visited our table told me with a smile, "I hope we're going to see some of the images here on your YouTube show." Well, I answered yes. I promised that I would share some of them, and here's the first one. Now, reflecting on all the scans I made this weekend, there were many intriguing images. This is one of the ones that came to my mind first. He's identified as John Kellow, Kellow. It's in a pencil inscription inside the case in which this tintype is framed. The owner of the image is Karl Sundstrom. He's a longtime collector and a friend. Kellow, judging from this appearance, looks like an interesting fellow. He's pictured here with long hair, most of it hidden beneath a dark hat he wears at a rakish angle. He's also wearing some sort of what appears to be a military coat. There's some pleats in the front. He's got gold-tinted buttons. He's wearing pants that come around tight around his calves. You can see a legging at the top of one of them, holding the bottom of his pants tight. There's also a pipe slightly out of focus with a wood or a meerschaum bowl. I can't quite tell because of the slight blurriness. It must have been wobbling as he leaned it against his leg. But clearly, we know that he enjoyed tobacco, enjoyed a good smoke. Now, we're looking at this image. This is how Kellow wants us to see him. And to my eye, he projects something of a roguish young man who was a character. Now, of course, I set out to find out exactly who he was to get a sense if my impression was correct. I first took a look at his military service record and other official reports, and they kind of reinforce the impression that I got just by looking at the image. The basics of his life and military service in the Confederate Army are these. He was born in Kentucky and 21 years old, a farmer in Clarksville, Tennessee. That's a community northwest of Nashville along the border with Kentucky. And that's where he was when the war began. Kellow promptly enlisted in Company F of the 14th Tennessee Infantry. It was in 1862. Less than a year after he mustered in, he transferred to the 2nd Kentucky Cavalry and fought in John Hunt Morgan's division in the corps of Joseph Wheeler. At some point in the middle of 1863, he disappeared from the regiment's rolls and was listed as a deserter. He died in 1927. His obituary in the November 11th, 1927 issue of the Tennessean newspaper fills in some of the details in his basic outline of information I just shared with you and some stories of his life as a soldier. I want to read the obituary to you because, as I mentioned, it fills in those details. It's date-lined Clarksville, Tennessee, and it starts, "Burial will be in Greenwood Cemetery in this city, Thursday, for John Kellow, 89, one of Montgomery County's most picturesque Civil War veterans, who died at his home in Salem Tuesday afternoon following 3 weeks of serious illness. Mr. Kellow's war experiences, which he frequently narrated, were numerous and thrilling. He played the roles of soldier, abductor, and co-collector of a $1,000 ransom for a local Union sympathizer, was imprisoned, sentenced to death, and made a free man through the artifices of his fiancée, who later became his life companion and survives him. Enlisting in Company F, 14th Tennessee Regiment, in which John Hurst, father of Mrs. Austin Pay, also fought, Mr. Kellow followed his regiment through the West Virginia campaign under General Robert E. Lee in 1861. He was detailed at Warm Springs, Virginia as a teamster and remained with his regiment in that capacity until he was put under General Stonewall Jackson's command in Harrisonburg, Virginia, as part of the Shenandoah Valley campaign of 1862. During Jackson's campaign, the obituary continues, Mr. Kellow was transferred to the Western Confederate Army and joined the cavalry under General Wheeler. During the closing days of the war, while Mr. Kellow and a band of other Southern sympathizers were molesting Union forces in this vicinity, a young man known as Bentley, the son of a Clarksville merchant, made threats that he could cross Cumberland River and kill the members of the tantalizing band. Hearing of this, Mr. Kellow and Mick Carney crossed the river one night, kidnapped Bentley at a dance in the Ben Coulter home near the corporate limits, whisked him across the river, and held him for a $1,000 ransom, which was paid by his father. At the close of the war, Mr. Kellow was arrested by the Union forces, chained in the local jail, and after a time tried and sentenced to hang. Miss Alice Matthews, later his bride, at once began tireless efforts to save his life. With the aid of 3 friends, William Taylor, Charles Meriwether, and Gip Irving, Miss Matthews succeeded in buying Kellow's captors off and having the prisoner transferred to Russellville, Kentucky. When things became unpleasant there, Mr. Kellow was removed to Louisville, where Miss Matthews bought his complete freedom. He returned to Tennessee, married Miss Matthews, and migrated to Texas, where they lived over a quarter of a century. Returning to Montgomery County, they purchased the old Ramey farm, where they have since lived. Mrs. Kellow, now 87 years of age, is still active, coming to Clarksville twice weekly to market her poultry and truck products. They have 4 children, Gil and Stuart Kellow, both of whom live in the West, Dick Kellow, Oklahoma City, and Miss Mattie Kellow, Denver, Colorado. The Reverend W.T.S. Cook, pastor of the Salem Methodist Church, will hold services tomorrow for Mr. Kellow. Now, all of the fact-checking to his records, the military service records, and the details are relatively consistent with Kellow's account in the obituary. So generally, all this seems to line up. There's a lot more work to do. I did try to find a reference to Bailey, to his ransom, that ransom being paid, to the role of Alice, and to getting him free from the chains, the bondage that he was in, and getting him out of his sentence for hanging. Couldn't find anything there quite yet, but the search will continue. So, what we do have so far is a story of a young man, pictured here, who looks a bit like a rogue with that hat at such a rakish angle. So, that's the story of John Kellow. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.